"Get your bags and get out. You don't belong in this cabin." Those were the words that echoed through the first-class cabin of Flight 404 to London, shattering the silence. Two brothers, sitting quietly in seats they had paid thousands for, were staring down a screaming woman and a flight crew who had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. They thought they were kicking off two helpless passengers. They didn't know they were about to declare war on the owners of the company that built the terminal they were standing in. It took 30 minutes to humiliate the twins, but it only took one phone call to ground the plane, fire the crew, and ruin a socialite's life forever. This isn't just a story about racism, it's a masterclass in patience, power, and the most satisfying karma you will ever hear. Date, October 14th, 2023. Location, JFK International Airport, Terminal 4 flight, Stratosphere Air Flight 882 to London Heathrow, time 1845 EST. The hum of the first-class lounge was a specific frequency of wealth, the clinking of crystal flutes, the hushed tones of business mergers being discussed over aged scotch, and the soft rustle of silk and cashmere. Sitting in the far corner, away from the buffet and the bar, were Donovan and Dominic Mercer, identical twins, 32 years old, dressed in bespoke charcoal suits that fit their broad frames with architectural precision. To the casual observer, they were just two handsome black men minding their own business. To the financial world, they were the Mercer double, a pair of crisis management consultants and venture capitalists who had quietly acquired a 12% stake in several logistics and infrastructure firms across Europe. They were exhausted. They had just spent 72 hours in New York negotiating a hostile takeover of a failing tech startup, saving 400 jobs in the process. All they wanted was the lie-flat seats of Flight 882, a glass of water, and sleep. "I checked the seat map," Donovan said, glancing at his phone. "We're in 1A and 1B, bulkhead. Nobody in front of us. Maximum legroom." Dominic rubbed his temples, closing his eyes. "Good. My head is pounding. Did you send the final contract to legal?" "Sent it 20 minutes ago. We are officially off the clock, Dom. Put the phone away." The boarding call for first-class passengers came over the intercom, a soft, inviting chime. The brothers gathered their leather weekend bags, no logos, just impeccable Italian leather, and made their way to the gate. They moved with the easy confidence of men who belonged exactly where they were. At the gate, the scanning agent, a young man named Kevin, took Donovan's boarding pass. The machine beeped green. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Mercer," Kevin smiled. "And you as well, Mr. Mercer. We have you in our new flagship suites today. Enjoy the flight." "Thanks, Kevin," Dominic nodded. They walked down the jet bridge, the cool air of the tunnel transitioning into the recycled conditioned air of the Boeing 777. They were the first to board, a perk of their status. The first-class cabin was empty, a sanctuary of cream-colored leather and walnut wood trim. They stowed their bags in the overhead bins and settled into seats 1A and 1B. Donovan took the window. Dominic took the aisle. "Champagne, gentlemen." The flight attendant, a blonde woman named Tiffany, stood over them. Her smile was practiced, tight at the corners, but polite enough. "Just water for now, please," Donovan said. "Sparkling if you have it." "Certainly." As Tiffany walked away to the galley, the rest of the first-class passengers began to trickle in. A tech CEO in a hoodie took seat 3A. An elderly couple settled into row 4. The atmosphere was calm. Then she arrived. Mrs. Gwendolyn Pree did not walk. She made an entrance. She was a woman in her late 50s, draped in a leopard print coat that looked expensive but loud, clutching a bright orange designer handbag like a weapon. She was followed by her husband, Arthur, a man who looked like he had spent the last 30 years apologizing for his wife. Gwendolen stopped at the entrance of the first-class cabin, her eyes scanning the seats. She looked at her boarding pass, then at the cabin, then at the twins, her face scrunched up, as if she had smelled something rotting. She marched down the aisle, her heels clicking aggressively on the carpet, and stopped right next to Dominic in seat 1B. She loomed over him, tapping her foot. Dominic opened his eyes, looking up. "Can I help you?" "You're in my seat," Gwendolen stated loudly. She didn't ask. She declared. Dominic blinked, confused. He pulled his boarding pass from his breast pocket. "I don't think so, ma'am. Seat 1B. My brother is in 1A. Gwendolen let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Don't play games with me. I fly this route once a month. My husband and I always sit in row 1. It's our row." "Well," Donovan interjected from the window seat, his voice calm and deep. "Today it seems the airline sold these seats to us. Perhaps you're in row 2. Gwendolen turned on him, her eyes narrowing. "I am not in row 2. I booked first class. I demand the front row." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that carried across the silent cabin. "And frankly, looking at you two, it's obvious there's been a mistake. The upgrade list is for frequent flyers, not staff travel." The air in the cabin instantly froze. The tech CEO in 3A took off his headphones. The elderly couple in row 4 stopped talking. Dominic sat up straighter, his expression hardening. "We aren't staff, ma'am. We paid full fare. Now, if you don't mind, you're blocking the aisle." Gwendolen's face turned a shade of crimson. She turned around and snapped her fingers towards the galley. "Stewardess! Excuse me, stewardess!" Tiffany, the flight attendant, came rushing out from behind the curtain, her face pale. She had heard the shouting. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Pree?" Tiffany asked. She clearly recognized the woman. "Yes, Tiffany, there is a massive problem." Gwendolen pointed a manicured finger at Dominic's face. "These individuals are in our seats. Arthur and I always sit in the bulkhead. Move them. Now." Tiffany looked at Gwendolen, then at the twins. This was the moment. The moment where training should have kicked in. The moment where Tiffany should have asked to see boarding passes, realized the twins were in their assigned seats, and politely told Gwendolen to take her actual seat. But Tiffany didn't do that. Tiffany was tired. She knew Gwendolen Pree was a Platinum Legacy member who complained about everything. And she looked at the Mercer twins, 2 young black men in hoodies. Donovan had put his hood up to sleep, and made a rapid, biased calculation. She assumed they were the path of least resistance. She assumed they didn't belong. Tiffany smoothed her uniform skirt and turned to the twins, her smile now gone, replaced by a look of stern condescension usually reserved for unruly children. "Gentlemen," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" "You already checked them when we boarded," Donovan said, not moving. "You served us water." "I need to check them again," Tiffany said, her voice rising slightly. "There seems to be a duplicate booking error." Dominic sighed, the heavy sigh of a man who had been through this script before. He retrieved the pass again and held it out. Tiffany snatched it from his hand. She stared at it. 1B. Dominic Mercer. It was valid. It was correct. But Gwendolen was hovering over her shoulder, breathing heavily. "Well, get them out of here. It smells like cheap cologne already." Tiffany looked at the pass, then at her manifest. She saw that the Pree family was actually assigned to seats 2A and 2B. They were right behind the twins. "Mrs. Pree," Tiffany started, "your seats are actually right here, in row 2. "I don't want row 2, Gwendolen shrieked. I want the bulkhead. I need the legroom for my circulation. And I certainly do not want to stare at the back of their heads for 7 hours. They are obviously upgrade passengers. Bump them back to economy where they fit in." Tiffany hesitated. She looked at Arthur Pree, who was looking at the floor, embarrassed but silent. Then she looked at the twins. "Gentlemen," Tiffany said, making a choice that would end her career. "Mrs. Pree has a medical requirement for the bulkhead seats. I'm going to have to ask you to move." Donovan laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Move where? To row 2? "No," Tiffany said, flustered. "Row 2 is taken by Mrs. Pree's booking. First class is full. I can move you to premium economy. There are 2 seats together in row 15. The audacity hung in the air like smoke. "Let me get this straight," Dominic said, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing up. He towered over Tiffany, standing 6'3". "You want us to give up the first-class seats we paid $12,000 for to move to economy because this woman prefers our seats, and you aren't offering a refund? You're just telling us to move?" "It's a crew instruction," Tiffany snapped, stepping back, intimidated by his height. "If you do not comply with crew instructions, it becomes a federal offense. I can have the pilot call the marshals." "Call them," Donovan said calmly. He pulled out his phone and hit record. "Go ahead. Call the pilot. Call the police. Call the Pope for all I care. We aren't moving." Gwendolyn gasped. You see how aggressive they are? I don't feel safe. Arthur, do something." Arthur muttered something unintelligible. Tiffany's face hardened. She felt her authority slipping. She pressed the intercom button. "Captain Miller to the first-class cabin. Captain Miller to first class immediately." The twins didn't shout. They didn't curse. They went into what they called boardroom mode. They became statues, cold, observant, dangerous. A moment later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Miller, a man with silver hair and a mustache that twitched when he was annoyed, stepped out. He saw the scene. Gwendolyn clutching her pearls, Tiffany looking flushed, and the 2 black men standing their ground. "What is the problem here?" Miller barked. "Captain," Tiffany said, pointing an accusing finger at Dominic. "These 2 passengers are refusing crew instructions. I asked them to switch seats to accommodate a medical request for Mrs. Pree, and they became aggressive. They are recording me without my consent." Miller turned to the twins. He didn't ask for their side of the story. He saw 2 young guys causing trouble for his lead flight attendant and a VIP frequent flyer. "Turn the phone off," Miller ordered Donovan. "No," Donovan said. "I am documenting this interaction for my legal counsel." "I am the captain of this vessel," Miller stepped forward, chest puffed out. "You will do as my crew says, or you will be removed from this flight. We have a schedule to keep. Now grab your bags and move to row 15, or get off my plane." "Captain," Dominic said, his voice dangerously low, "I advise you to check the passenger manifest one more time. Look at the names. Look at the corporate affiliation attached to the booking." "I don't care who you work for," Miller spat. "I don't care if you're rappers or basketball players. On this plane, I am God, and I am telling you to get out of those seats." Gwendolyn smirked, crossing her arms triumphantly. "Bye-bye, boys." Donovan looked at Dominic. They shared a silent communication that only twins understand. It was a look that said, "Let them dig the grave deeper." "Fine," Dominic said. "We will deplane." "What?" Donovan looked at him, feigning surprise. "We're getting off, Don," Dominic said, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "We aren't going to row 15. We are getting off. The captain has deemed us a security risk for sitting in our assigned seats. We will comply." Dominic grabbed his bag from the overhead bin. Donovan did the same. "Smart choice," Captain Miller grunted. "Tiffany, escort them to the gate agent. Make sure their luggage is pulled from the hold. And make sure they are banned," Gwendolyn shouted after them. "I don't want to see them on my return flight." As the twins walked down the aisle, carrying their bags, the cabin was silent. The tech CEO in 3A caught Dominic's eye and shook his head in disbelief, mouthing, "Sorry, man." Tiffany marched them up the jet bridge like criminals. When they reached the terminal gate, she turned to the gate agent. "Kevin. Cancel their tickets. Refusal to follow crew instructions. Aggressive behavior. Captain wants them blacklisted." Kevin, who had checked them in earlier, looked confused. "Mr. Mercer." But they were perfectly polite. "Just do it," Tiffany snapped. Then she turned to the twins, a smug look of victory on her face. "You can contact customer service for a refund, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Have a nice night." She spun on her heel and marched back down the jet bridge to the plane. Donovan and Dominic stood in the middle of Terminal 4. The humiliated silence hung around them for exactly 3 seconds. Then Dominic pulled out his phone. He didn't call customer service. He didn't call a lawyer. He opened his contacts list and scrolled to the letter R. He pressed the name Richard Sterling. Note: Richard Sterling was not just anyone. He was the global CEO of Stratosphere Air. And he was also the man who was currently sitting at a dinner party in London, waiting for the Mercer twins to arrive the next morning to sign a $400 million contract for the new terminal expansion. Dominic put the phone to his ear. It rang twice. "Dom?" Richard's voice came through, warm and jovial. "You boys in the air yet? I've got that 1982 Bordeaux breathing for tomorrow night." "Hey, Richard," Dominic said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We aren't coming." "What? Why? Weather delay?" "No," Dominic said, looking through the glass window at Flight 882, pushing back from the gate. "Your captain, Miller, and your flight attendant, Tiffany, just kicked us off the plane, so a woman named Gwendolyn Pree could have our seats. They called us aggressive and threatened us with federal marshals." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure had dropped. "Repeat that," Richard said. His voice was no longer jovial. It was ice cold. "We were racially profiled, humiliated, and ejected from your flagship flight, Richard. We are standing at gate B32. The plane is taxiing right now." "Don't move," Richard said. "Do not move 1 inch. Give me 2 minutes." The line went dead. Donovan looked at his watch. "How long do you think?" "I give it 5 minutes before that plane turns around," Dominic said. "I'll take the under," Donovan replied, watching the plane moving slowly on the tarmac. "I give it 3. Location, onboard flight 882. Taxiway K. Time 19:05 EST. Inside the cockpit of the Boeing 737, Captain Miller was feeling pretty good about himself. He adjusted his headset and chuckled to his first officer, a younger man named David, who looked uneasy about what had just transpired. "Don't look so worried, kid," Miller said, guiding the massive aircraft toward the runway. "In this industry, you have to know who pays the bills. That woman in 1A? Gwendolyn Pree. Her husband owns Pree Industries. They ship millions of dollars of cargo with us annually. You keep them happy. Those 2 guys in hoodies, they're just noise. We'll fill out an incident report, say they were belligerent, and corporate will back us up. Standard procedure." David hesitated. "I don't know, Cap. They seemed really calm." The tall one, Dominic, he didn't look like a troublemaker. He looked like he was memorizing my face. "Intimidation tactics," Miller scoffed. "I've seen it 1,000,000 times. Once we're wheels up, they're yesterday's problem." Miller pressed the radio button. "Tower, Stratosphere 882. Holding short of runway 4 left, ready for departure. Static crackled in his ear. Usually the response was immediate clearance. Instead, there was a pause. A long, uncomfortable pause. When the voice from the air traffic control tower came back, it wasn't the usual rhythmic, bored tone of a controller. It was the supervisor, and he sounded urgent. Stratosphere 882, cancel takeoff clearance immediately. I repeat, cancel takeoff clearance. Miller frowned. Tower 882, what's the issue? Weather? Negative 882. We have a code-red instruction from your dispatch. You are ordered to stop the aircraft immediately and return to gate B32. Do not proceed. Do not pass. Go. Acknowledge. Miller felt a cold prickle of sweat on his neck. Code red? That was usually reserved for bomb threats or mechanical failures. Tower, we have a pressurized schedule here, Miller argued, his voice tight. We are number 1 for departure. Can we resolve this via radio? Stratosphere 882. The controller's voice cut like a knife. This order comes directly from the global headquarters in London. They have suspended your flight plan. If you take off, you will be intercepted. Turn around. Now. The color drained from Miller's face. Beside him, David's eyes went wide. Intercepted? David whispered. What did you do, Miller? I didn't do anything, Miller snapped, though his hand shook as he engaged the tiller to turn the nose gear. Back in the first-class cabin, the sensation of the plane turning sharply on the tarmac caused a ripple of confusion. Gwendolyn Pree, who was happily sipping the pre-departure champagne in seat 1A, Donovan's seat, looked out the window. Why are we turning? She demanded, looking for Tiffany. We were about to take off. I have a dinner reservation in London. Tiffany hurried over, looking equally confused. I'm not sure, Mrs. Pree. The captain hasn't said anything. Probably just a lane change. But then the captain's voice came over the intercom. It wasn't the confident, God of the sky voice from 10 minutes ago. It sounded shaky, strangled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We have been ordered by corporate dispatch to return to the gate for a mandatory crew adjustment. We apologize for the delay. Please remain seated. Crew adjustment? Gwendolyn scoffed loudly. Incompetence is what it is. First those hooligans, now this. I am writing a letter. She leaned back, stretching her legs into the bulkhead space she had stolen. She had no idea that the hooligans were currently standing at the window of the terminal, watching the massive plane crawl back to them like an obedient dog. Inside the terminal, Dominic and Donovan hadn't moved. They stood with their arms crossed, watching the 717 dock. Donovan looked at his phone. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. You lost the bet, Dom. You said 5 minutes. I'm happy to lose this one, Dominic replied. His phone buzzed. It was the CEO. Dom! The CEO's voice was sharp. The plane is at the gate. The station manager, Paul O'Connell, is meeting you there right now. I've authorized him to do whatever is necessary. I am so incredibly sorry. This is not who we are. We know, Rob, Dominic said, using the CEO's first name familiarly. But your culture is broken. Miller and Tiffany felt comfortable doing this. That's the problem. It ends tonight, the CEO promised. Put O'Connell on speaker when he arrives. A man in a navy blue suit, sprinting so hard he was sweating, came rounding the corner of the gate area. He had a security badge that read, Station Manager. Paul O'Connell. He looked terrified. He stopped in front of the twins, gasping for air. Mr. Mercer! Mr. Mercer! Paul wheezed, bowing his head slightly. I am Paul O'Connell. I just got off the phone with London. I don't even know where to begin to apologize. Save the apology, Paul, Dominic said calmly. Let's go on board. I think we forgot something in our seats. Location, Gate B32, Flight 882. Time, 1920. EST. The jet bridge door opened. Tiffany was standing there, ready to yell at the gate agent for the delay. Instead, she found herself face to chest with Paul O'Connell, her boss's boss's boss. And behind him, the two hoodies she had kicked off. "Mr. O'Connell," Tiffany stammered. "What? What is going on? Did security bring them back?" Paul O'Connell didn't even look at her. He walked right past her, onto the plane, followed by the twins and 3 airport police officers. The entire first-class cabin went silent. Gwendolyn Pree dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the floor. Paul stood at the front of the cabin. He picked up the interphone handset, the one flight attendants use for announcements. "Captain Miller to the forward galley, immediately." A moment later, the cockpit door opened. Miller stepped out, looking furious. "Who is authorized to—" He stopped dead when he saw Paul. "Paul, what the hell is this? Why was I grounded?" Paul O'Connell's voice was quiet, but in the silent cabin, it sounded like thunder. "Captain Miller, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Gather your personal effects and leave the aircraft." Miller's jaw dropped. "Relieved? On whose authority?" "I have a union." "On the authority of the global CEO." Paul cut him off. "And the board of directors. You effectively hijacked a company asset to discriminate against 2 of our majority investors." Miller froze. He looked at the twins. He looked at their hoodies. Then he looked at their faces. "Investors?" Miller whispered. "Dominic and Donovan Mercer," Paul announced, gesturing to the brothers. "They own Mercer Capital, which, as of last quarter, owns the logistics subsidiary that supplies this airline with fuel. They also, coincidentally, are personal friends of the CEO, and you just kicked them off for, what was it? Aggression?" The blood drained from Miller's face so fast he looked like a ghost. I didn't know," Miller stammered. They didn't say." "We told you to check the manifest," Dominic said. His voice was smooth, calm, and terrifying. "We told you to look at the booking codes. You chose to look at our skin color instead." "And you?" Paul turned to Tiffany, who was trembling by the galley curtain. "You cited a medical necessity that didn't exist to displace paid first-class passengers. That is a violation of federal aviation regulations and company policy. Hand over your badge, Tiffany. You're done." "You can't fire me," Tiffany shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "I was just trying to help Mrs. Pree. She's a platinum member." "Mrs. Pree is not the airline," Paul said coldly. "Get your bags, both of you, off the plane, now." The humiliation was absolute. Captain Miller, a man who had strutted through the terminal an hour ago, had to go back into the cockpit, grab his pilot's bag, and walk out. As he passed Dominic, he couldn't even make eye contact. Tiffany was sobbing loudly as she grabbed her purse. She looked at Gwendolyn, pleading for help. "Mrs. Pree, tell them I was helping you." Gwendolyn Pree said nothing. She turned her head away, pretending to look out the window, distancing herself from the wreckage she had caused. As the disgraced crew walked up the aisle, the rest of the passengers watched in stunned silence. The tech CEO in 3A started a slow clap. It wasn't loud, but it was brutal. Paul O'Connell turned to the twins. "Gentlemen, we have a reserve crew on standby. They are en route and will be here in 20 minutes to fly this plane to London. I will personally ensure your bags are reloaded." "Thank you, Paul," Donovan said. "However," Dominic added, his eyes shifting to seat 1A, "there is still one piece of trash on this plane that needs to be removed before we can sit down. Location: Seat 1A, Flight 882. Time: 1935. EST. The exit of the disgraced flight crew left a vacuum in the first-class cabin. The air, previously thick with the noise of Captain Miller's blustering and Tiffany's sobbing, settled into a heavy, expectant silence. It was the kind of silence that precedes an execution. Every eye in the cabin, the tech CEO in 3A, the elderly couple in row 4, the new flight crew huddled by the galley, and the 3 airport police officers standing like sentinels at the door, turned toward row 1. Gwendoline Pree sat alone in the wreckage of her own making. She could feel the shift in the room's atmospheric pressure. 10 minutes ago, she had been the queen of the cabin, commanding the staff to remove the undesirables. Now she was a squatter on borrowed land. She sat rigidly, her knuckles white as she strangled the handle of her orange Hermes bag. She stared straight ahead at the bulkhead wall, refusing to acknowledge the 2 men standing in the aisle. If she didn't look at them, she reasoned, they couldn't move her. She was Gwendoline Pree. Her husband was Arthur Pree. They were untouchable. Dominic Mercer broke the silence. He didn't shout, he didn't rage, he moved with the slow, predatory grace of a large cat. He walked up to row 1 and rested his hand on the leather headrest of seat 1A, right next to Gwendoline's ear. "Mrs. Pree," Dominic said. His voice was a low rumble, soft but carrying a weight that vibrated through the seat frame. "You're in my seat." Gwendoline whipped her head around, her eyes blazing with a mixture of panicked fury and disbelief. The audacity. "I am not moving," she hissed, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "I paid for this flight. I am a Platinum Legacy member. If you think you can intimidate me just because you managed to get those incompetent fools fired, you are sorely mistaken." She looked past Dominic, seeking an ally, desperate to re-establish the hierarchy she understood. Her eyes landed on Paul O'Connell, the station manager, who was standing by the cockpit door with a tablet in his hand. "Mr. Station Manager," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Dominic's chest. "I demand these men be removed immediately. They are harassing me. I do not feel safe." Paul O'Connell stepped forward. He didn't look at her with the deference she was used to. He looked at her with the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "Mrs. Pree," Paul said, his voice cutting through her hysteria. "I am looking at your husband's account history right now." He tapped the screen of his tablet, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. "It seems your company, Pree Industries, has a corporate travel contract with Stratosphere Air. Is that correct?" "That's right," Gwendoline snapped, seizing on this as her lifeline. "We spend millions with this airline, millions. So you better show some respect before my husband pulls every dime of funding." She nudged Arthur, who was shrinking into seat 2B, trying to become invisible. "Tell him, Arthur. Tell him who we are." Paul ignored the outburst. He looked up from the tablet, his face unreadable. "We value our corporate partners, Mrs. Pree. However, the terms of carriage, which your husband signed, explicitly state that any passenger who incites a disturbance, verbally abuses crew or other passengers, or causes a flight delay, is subject to a lifetime ban and immediate forfeiture of all status." Gwendoline let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "You wouldn't dare. Do you know how much cargo we ship? My husband will pull the contract before you can blink." "Actually?" a new voice interjected. Donovan Mercer stepped up beside his brother. He was holding his phone, scrolling through a financial report. The casual way he leaned against the bulkhead wall was terrifying. It was the posture of a man who held all the aces. "I just looked up Pree Industries," Donovan said conversationally, addressing the room rather than Gwendoline. "You guys manufacture industrial HVAC units, right? Big commercial cooling towers? And you export about 80% of your stock to the UK and Western Europe." Arthur Pree's head snapped up. For the first time, he looked directly at the twins. His face was the color of old ash. "What business is it of yours?" Arthur asked, his voice cracking. Donovan smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a shark's grin, all teeth and danger. "Well," Donovan continued, turning the phone screen so Arthur could see the graph displayed there. "It's funny you mention shipping. Mercer Capital recently acquired the primary logistics distribution hub at Heathrow Airport, Terminal 4 Cargo to be specific, the exact hub your products have to pass through to enter the United Kingdom." The silence that followed was absolute. Donovan lowered the phone, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. "If you pull your contract with this airline, Arthur, you'll lose your air freight priority. And if you try to switch carriers, you'll still have to go through my warehouse. And I have a very strong feeling, that my customs inspectors are going to be very, very thorough with your crates. It could take weeks to clear them." Arthur Pree went rigid. He understood business. He understood supply chains. And in that split second, he realized the horrifying truth. These weren't just two guys in hoodies. These were the gatekeepers. They were the water the Pree family fish swam in. "If you have to ship via sea freight," Donovan mused, driving the final nail into the coffin, "that adds 3 weeks to your delivery time. You'll miss the winter installation window. Your business would collapse in a quarter." Arthur Pree looked at the twins. Then he looked at Paul O'Connell, who was nodding in agreement. Then, slowly, he looked at his wife. "Gwendolen," Arthur whispered. The tone was urgent, desperate. "What?" Gwendolen snapped, still oblivious to the financial guillotine hanging over her neck. "Arthur, tell them off." "Get up," Arthur hissed, grabbing her arm. "Excuse me? Get up." Arthur's voice rose to a shout, startling her. "We are leaving, now." "I will not." Gwendolen yanked her arm back, her face twisting in confusion. "Arthur, fight them." "There is no fight, Gwen," Arthur cried out, standing up and grabbing his briefcase with shaking hands. "We are leaving before you bankrupt us. Get your bag." "Mrs. Pree," Paul O'Connell stepped in to deliver the coup de grace. "Let me make this official. You are hereby banned from Stratosphere Air. Your return tickets are cancelled. Your mileage account is terminated. You need to leave this aircraft immediately, or the police officers behind me will escort you off in handcuffs. And I assure you, the paparazzi are already waiting at the gate." Gwendolen looked at the police, who were taking a step forward, hands hovering near their belts. She looked at her terrified husband, a man she had bullied for years, who was now looking at her with pure resentment. Finally, she looked at the twins. Dominic and Donovan were watching her with cool, detached amusement. They weren't angry anymore. They were just waiting for the trash to be taken out. The reality crashed down on her. It was over. She stood up, her legs shaking so hard the heels of her shoes clicked unevenly on the floor. She grabbed her leopard print coat, wrapping it around herself like armor that had failed. This is reverse racism," she spat, the words flying out in a desperate attempt to salvage some dignity. "I will sue every single one of you. You'll hear from my lawyers." "You can try," Dominic said, stepping aside smoothly to let her pass, like a doorman at a club she wasn't cool enough to enter. "But I'd save your money for a good PR firm. You're going to need it." The walk of shame for Gwendolen Pree was an agonizing mile. As she turned from the first-class cabin into the galley, she had to pass through the curtain. But the curtain wasn't just a divider, it was the gateway to the public. As she entered the main aisle to exit the plane, the economy passengers, who had been delayed for 40 minutes and had heard every rumor via text message, were waiting. It was a gauntlet of judgment. "Bye, Karen," a teenager shouted from row 20, filming her with his phone. "Don't let the door hit you," another voice yelled from the back. "Safe travels," someone mocked. Arthur Pree walked 5 paces behind her, head down, staring at the carpet, holding his head in his hands. He knew his life was about to become a living hell, and he knew he deserved it for not speaking up sooner. As the couple disappeared onto the jet bridge, the fresh crew, a new captain and flight attendants who had been briefed and were terrified of making a mistake, boarded the aircraft. Dominic and Donovan stood looking at seats 1A and 1B. The ghost of Gwendolyn Pree still lingered. The champagne glass she had dropped lay shattered on the floor. The blanket was rumpled where she had sat. The air smelled faintly of her overpowering perfume and fear. "I'm not sitting there," Donovan said, wrinkling his nose in genuine disgust. "Bad energy." Paul O'Connell nodded vigorously. "I completely understand, Mr. Mercer. I'll have the cleaning crew sanitize the entire row immediately. We will replace the cushions and the blankets." He paused, looking at the brothers with a mixture of awe and apology. "And, gentlemen, on behalf of the airline, I've credited your accounts with 1 million miles each, and Mr. Dalton, the CEO, would like to buy you dinner when you land in London." "Tell Rob we're on for dinner," Dominic said, finally relaxing his shoulders. He sat down in seat 1B as the cleaners rushed in with disinfectant sprays. "But tell him he's paying for the wine, the expensive stuff." The twins settled in. The door closed, sealing out the chaos of New York. The plane pushed back. But as the engine spooled up, the story wasn't over. The real-life karma was just warming up. Because while Gwendolyn Pree was storming up the jet bridge, furious and humiliated, she didn't know that the video Donovan had recorded was currently buffering at 99%. By the time she reached baggage claim, the upload would be complete and the internet would know her name. Location: the Van Wyck Expressway. The cloud time: 20:45 EST, 1 hour after eviction. While Flight 882 was climbing smoothly through the dark tranquility of 35,000 feet, a very different kind of turbulence was brewing on the ground. Gwendolyn and Arthur Pree sat in the back of a Lincoln Town car, crawling through the gridlock of the Van Wyck Expressway. The silence in the car was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic thwump-thwump of windshield wipers fighting the New York drizzle. Arthur stared out the window at the red sea of taillights, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He had spent 30 years in business. He knew the difference between a minor altercation and a catastrophe. This felt like the latter. Gwendolyn, however, was busy rewriting history. Her face was illuminated by the harsh blue light of her smartphone. She was typing furiously on Facebook, her thumbs hammering the glass screen. In her mind, she was the victim of a service failure, a martyr for the good old days of travel. She was crafting a narrative of righteous indignation, using phrases like aggressive behavior, unsafe environments, and the utter decline of service standards. "I'm tagging the airline," she muttered, hitting the post button with a satisfying tap. "And I'm posting this to the neighborhood group. Let's see how they like the bad press." She sat back, expecting the digital applause of her peers. She expected sympathy. She expected validation. She had no idea that 45 minutes earlier, before the plane had even pushed back for the second time, Donovan Mercer had pressed a button of his own. Donovan hadn't bothered with Facebook. He knew the battlefield of public opinion wasn't fought in private groups. It was fought on the open plains of X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok. He hadn't written a long, whining paragraph. He had simply uploaded the raw footage, 2 minutes of unedited reality, with a caption that was lethal in its simplicity. "Airline tries to move us to economy because a donor wanted our paid seats. Watch what happens when you know the owner. Flight 882. There's first class, Yeshas Karen." The algorithm caught the spark instantly. By the time the Prestown car reached the Queen's Midtown Tunnel, the video had jumped from 20,000 views to 200,000. The internet does not sleep, and it has a voracious appetite for justice. The video was a masterpiece of contrast. It showed the veins bulging in Gwendolyn's neck as she screamed, "You don't belong here." It captured the sneering condescension of Captain Miller, but crucially, it captured the twins. They were statues of calm. They didn't shout, they didn't curse, they simply stood there, broad-shouldered and polite, asking logical questions while chaos erupted around them. The internet loves a villain, but it worships a calm hero. Arthur's phone began to buzz. Then it stopped. Then it buzzed again. Then it began to ring, a relentless, jarring sound in the quiet car. He looked at the screen. It was Jerry, his chief financial officer. Jerry never called past 8:00 p.m. "I'm not in the mood, Jerry," Arthur answered, snapping the phone to his ear. "We just had a terrible travel experience. I'm tired." "Arthur, listen to me." Jerry's voice cracked through the speaker, breathless and panicked. "You need to look at your phone, right now. Have you seen the internet?" "I don't care about the internet," Arthur dismissed him. "Gwendolyn is handling a complaint." "Arthur, she's not handling a complaint. She's starring in a viral video," Jerry shouted, abandoning all professional protocol. "It's trending #1 globally. People aren't just watching it, they're dissecting it. They've identified the bag, Arthur. They've identified you." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" "The comments, Arthur. Read the comments." Arthur put the phone on speaker and opened Twitter. His hands shook as he scrolled. "Jet Set Life. Wait, is that Gwendolyn Pree, the wife of the HVAC guy? I recognize that orange Hermes bag. That costs 40K, but she has 0 class." Wall Street Watcher. "Did she really try to kick the Mercer twins off a plane? Does she realize Mercer Capital owns the logistics chain her husband uses? Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. Arip Pree Industries." Becky with the tea. "I used to fly with that attendant, Tiffany. She was a nightmare. Finally, karma came to collect." "Our stock is down 4% in after-hours trading," Jerry continued, his voice trembling. "The UK distributors are being tagged in the video. People are calling for a boycott of Pree Industries until you issue a statement. We are bleeding, Arthur. We are bleeding out." Arthur dropped the phone. It clattered onto the leather seat. He looked at Gwendolyn. She was staring at her own phone, but the smug satisfaction was gone. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. The notifications weren't likes from her friends. They were thousands of strangers calling her name, mocking her entitlement, and cheering for her downfall. They're just internet trolls. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Ignore them. They don't matter." But Arthur knew better. In the modern world, the trolls were the jury, and the verdict had already been delivered. By the next morning, the story had leapt from the chaotic realm of social media to the ironclad pages of serious journalism. The real private names of the business world got involved. The New York Times business section didn't run a puff piece about a passenger dispute. They ran an analysis of corporate suicide. The headline was stark and devastating. "The $12 million seat, how a mid-air dispute exposed Pree Industries' vulnerable supply chain." The article detailed exactly what Donovan had threatened on the plane. It explained, with cold financial logic, that Mercer Capital controlled the logistics hub at Heathrow. It speculated that if Mercer Capital exercised their right to refuse service, Pree Industries would face a 40% revenue loss within 2 months. Gwendolyn Pree wasn't just a Karen anymore. She was a fiduciary liability. And as the car finally pulled up to their building, Arthur realized with sinking clarity that the flight was over. But the crash was just beginning. Location: London, England, New York City time. 1 week later, the fallout from Flight 882 didn't hit like a sudden explosion. It arrived like a suffocating fog, slow, heavy, and inescapable. For the crew, the end was administrative and brutal. Captain Miller, a man who had spent 30 years building a reputation as a company man, found himself sitting in a sterile HR office in Queens. There was no yelling, no dramatic table flipping, just a young legal associate sliding a single piece of paper across a glass table. "Gross misconduct," the associate read, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Violation of federal aviation regulations regarding passenger safety. Discriminatory conduct against major shareholders." Miller tried to speak, to mention his pension, his years of service. "I was protecting a legacy client," he croaked, his voice a shadow of the boom he had used on the plane. "You were protecting a liability, Mr. Miller," the associate corrected him, taking his badge. "You are grounded, permanently. Your pension has been frozen pending the internal audit." Miller walked out of the building into the grey New York drizzle, a man who had played God at 35,000 feet, now realizing he was just another unemployed statistic on the ground. Tiffany fared no better. Her name had become radioactive in the service industry. When she applied for a bartending job 3 days later, the manager simply turned his laptop screen around, showed her the viral video, and asked her to leave. But the crew were merely pawns. The true king and queen were about to fall. Gwendolyn Pree sat in her penthouse, overlooking Central Park. It was a Tuesday, usually the day she met the ladies of the committee for lunch at the Beacon Hill Country Club. But today, her phone was silent. She tried to call her friend, Catherine. Voicemail. She tried to call the maitre d' at her favorite restaurant. Fully booked, Mrs. Pree. Until, well, indefinitely. Then came the courier. He didn't ring the bell. He just slid a thick, cream-colored envelope under the door. It bore the crest of the country club, the institution she had built her entire social identity around. Her hands trembled as she tore the wax seal. The letter was brief, cruel, and efficient. "Dear Mrs. Pree, the board has convened regarding the recent viral media involving your conduct. We find that your behavior does not align with the values of dignity and grace we uphold. Your membership is revoked, effective immediately. Please return your locker key by mail. Do not come to the premises." She dropped the letter. It wasn't just a ban, it was a social execution. She was trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by expensive furniture, with absolutely nowhere to go. While Gwendolyn sat in silence, the real noise was happening across the Atlantic. Dominic and Donovan Mercer walked into the headquarters of Stratosphere Air in London. The atmosphere was different this time. As they moved through the glass-walled corridors, heads turned. Executives stopped talking. Everyone knew who they were. They were the men who could ground a fleet with a phone call. They were ushered into the top-floor office of Richard Dalton, the global CEO. Dalton, a man who usually wore a smile, looked tired. He stood up immediately, bypassing the desk to shake their hands. "Gentlemen," Dalton said, the strain evident in his voice. "I can't tell you how embarrassed I am. The regional team at JFK has been gutted. We are rewriting the entire training manual." "We saw the press release, Richard," Donovan said, taking a seat on the leather sofa. "It was a good start. But," Dominic added, his voice dropping an octave, "we aren't here for apologies. We're here for business." Dominic opened his briefcase. He didn't pull out a lawsuit. He pulled out a logistics report. He slid it across the mahogany desk. "Pree Industries," Dominic said. "Your biggest cargo client for the UK route." Dalton looked at the file. He nodded slowly. "Arthur Pree." I've known him for 10 years. His contract is up for renewal next month." "Arthur Pree enabled his wife to humiliate us," Dominic said, his eyes locking with Dalton's. He stood there and watched. "And now we are looking at our own assets. Mercer Capital owns the distribution hub at Heathrow. We process 70% of your incoming freight." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. If Stratosphere Air kept Pree Industries as a client, Mercer Capital would choke Stratosphere's access to the airport. Dalton didn't hesitate. He was a CEO. He knew how to count. "We don't need them," Dalton said, pushing the file back. "I'll have legal draft the non-renewal notice today. We will cite reputational risk and supply chain incompatibility. Pree Industries will have to find another way to ship their units." "Sea freight takes 3 weeks longer," Donovan noted dryly. "They'll miss the winter installation window. Their stock will tank." "That sounds like an Arthur Pree problem," Dalton said, reaching for a bottle of vintage wine. "Not a Stratosphere problem." The kill shot had been fired. 2 days later, the news broke. Pree Industries' stock plummeted 35% in a single afternoon. The board of directors, seeing their profit margins evaporate due to the shipping crisis, called an emergency meeting. By Friday, Arthur Pree was voted out as CEO. He was forced into early retirement, stripping him of his salary and leaving him with a devalued portfolio and a wife who was the most hated woman in New York. The loop was closed. 2 weeks later, Dominic and Donovan stood at the gate at JFK, ready to head home. The air in the terminal felt lighter. As they approached the desk, the new gate agent, a young woman with a bright, genuine smile, stood up. "Mr. Mercer and Mr. Mercer," she beamed, "we have been expecting you. We have you in 1A and 1B. And per Mr. Dalton's instructions, we've kept the entire first-class cabin empty for you, just so you have some peace and quiet." Dominic chuckled. He took his boarding pass, feeling the weight of the paper. It felt like a receipt for a transaction that was finally settled. They walked down the jet bridge, the same path they had walked in shame just weeks prior. This time they walked as kings. As they settled into the wide leather seats, Donovan accepted a glass of champagne. He looked at his brother. "You know, looking back at Arthur and Gwendolyn," Donovan mused, watching the bubbles rise in his glass. "Justice is sweet, isn't it?" Dominic reclined his seat, closing his eyes with a contented sigh. He thought about the fired captain, the shamed socialite, and the bankrupt CEO. "No, Don," Dominic corrected him softly. "Justice is necessary. Revenge is sweet." He opened one eye, a small, sharp smile playing on his lips. This was just business. And that is how you handle disrespect. They didn't scream, they didn't fight, and they didn't get dragged off in handcuffs. They used the most powerful weapon in the world, leverage. Gwendolyn Pree thought she was the queen of the world because she had a platinum card, but she forgot that the people she was yelling at owned the bank. The lesson here is simple. Be humble. You never know who you are talking to. You never know who is sitting in that hoodie next to you. It could be a student, it could be a nobody, or it could be the person who holds the keys to your entire future. Gwendolyn learned that the hard way. If you enjoyed this story of absolute karma, smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone get instant karma at an airport? I want to hear your stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode of real-life drama. Stay safe and stay humble.